So, Dewey,
Good morning.
this morning we may see other people in our room.
That'll be a first.
My office only has one door, so I'm going to have to let him in through the computer. Is that all right?
That works for me.
How are you, brother?
I am well. I've had a really good week. So very exciting last couple, 3 days. How are you
What's
doing?
been so exciting?
Well, the other day on the Master Circle was amazing.
Yeah, that was a good.
I love that. Just really good stuff. I have a dear friend, Ayal, who's hanging with me
Nice.
last day or two,
Nice.
and we've been just talking and creating, and so yeah, that's what's made it great.
You're having a bit of a creative boot camp working on your website, right?
That'd be sort of that'd be more than true.
Yeah. We
In fact,
spent all
yeah.
day on stage yesterday.
Oh, you did?
Kimberly had a client fly in from mid-state New York. She's a homesteader, has pretty much every animal you can imagine. Half of them are food animals, and the other half are pets. Grows all their own food, full farm to table family. And Kimberly's been coaching her for a year, and she came out and spent all day on stage shooting her case stories, origin story, signature story for use on website and in social. And it's so interesting to be with someone who is telling their life story. Right. Listening to someone's life story is so critical. And Ryan, if I could give you a note, if you could help us mute folks when they come in, that'd be great. So the idea of telling stories and telling your story is pretty much the rest of my life's work, right? Helping people do that, right? And like the origin story, how did you get into doing what you're doing today? And be able to tell that. The case stories, people who work with you, what was their story before they met you? What's their story after they met you? And then your signature story, what's that story that puts you on the planet? And for me, as the producer sitting off stage and watching the whole team, the audio, the cameraman, makeup, Kimberly coaching, to someone who is not used to being in front of a camera. And watching that person transform. You've seen us on stage, right?
Oh, totally. Watch
her really step into the story was just transformational. It was spectacular. It's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah, what was it in particular about her, and not her story, that's hers to share, but about what, I mean, it must have been a really big shift from being a homesteader to being on stage. I mean,
well, the thing was, she was a teacher before she started this business that she was there to tell these stories about, right? So she knows how to be in front of people. She loves talking to people. She loves all of that. It's the standing on stage with a camera staring at you, and Kimberly's really good at coaxing and being a coach. She's a coach, right? That's what she does. But I said, tell me about your favorite customer. She said, oh, well, it's dun, 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 Kathy. And I said, okay, picture Kathy as the camera. And you're just talking to Kathy. You're just talking to your friend. So it's about, we've talked about it on the show a lot, about the story we tell ourselves. And the story we tell ourselves is, I'm in this weird environment. Of course, she'd never been on stage, never had cameras with all the lights and makeup and people fussing with the air and all that. But being able to tear all that stuff away and be present and in your story. And Kimberly has her just close your eyes, be quiet, be present, and then go back to the place where that story was. You're now in the story. Now tell Kathy the story. And to have someone who could take the coaching and then watch the coaching work
Mm.
was just, and she was nervous and all the normal stuff, but it's like, yeah, now you're on stage and doing something that's super important for your business and getting these stories out to the world so you can help people. Let's get into that frame. That was fantastic.
No, that's magical.
And this morning we're doing something different. We're doing an elders live. So rather than just us talking about stuff that's important, we've invited some guys from the nation. And this week we've also made some decisions to kind of open up the show to other groups of men. So we'll be doing that over the next several weeks. So this is kind of, we're at a little pivot point here, my friend.
Yeah, that's exciting. Um, yeah, it's sort of talk about an origin story and sort of changing sort of a little bit of the energy of what we do. It's super exciting.
For those who
Really
have not
interesting.
heard how we got started, we have our own story. It was,
We have our own origin story. That'd be
yeah,
true.
right. It was Saturday, and Traver was driving home after meeting you for the first time, and he called me and said, "There's a guy you got to meet." And it was that immediate. And he's like brother from another mother. And I think I called you nearly immediately.
I think
And
it was the same day or the next day. I
yeah,
forget.
and we set up a call for that coming Saturday and talked like we talked, just you guys, it was just like this, and as if we'd known each other our entire lives. And at the end of it, said, "Thank you, sir. Could I have another?" And we talked the following Saturday, and on the third Saturday, I said, "Would it be okay if I hit the record button?" And that was 60 shows ago.
Isn't that amazing?
It, it,
I
it,
didn't. I didn't know that Traver called you on his way home from here.
he
That's
did.
crazy.
It was a the universe. We love it when the universe taps us on the shoulder, and I'm so um I talk about that so much that the universe doesn't have to tap me too hard. I'm like, yeah, yes, sir.
You're right.
Whatever you say, I will. I'm
Hello,
gonna
Bar.
do that. Yes. So there was a question that came in. We announced that we were going to do this live, and a question came in about common sense.
Mm.
And what is common sense, and when do we use it, and there's all those things. The guy's got a lot of common sense, or he's got street smarts, or any of those things related to that. And what was really interesting and something I just loved was he answered his own question in the chat.
Really?
Yeah. He said, "Is common sense equal to unconscious competence?" And I
Mm.
thought we would start there today, sir.
From your perspective, because I have a number of thoughts on this. From your perspective, how does common sense and unconscious competence relate? Because inside me, I sort of go to a little bit different place. So maybe what we can talk about are different possibilities on how we get to sort of a common sense kind of a place.
So if we deconstruct the two words common sense, it would be, it's common, it's known to all, and it's sense, there's a sensibility. So in a situation, everyone knows this is what you do. You have common sense, man. Well, you could almost hear the way someone might say, use your common sense. Like everybody knows how to behave in this situation.
So common sense put that way, as opposed to what? Because part of my perspective is not that many people have that much common sense.
That's a sweeping indictment of the human
There,
race.
there you go. It's like, okay, where's your fucking common sense? And it's like not many people have that.
Um, I will I'm gonna yes and that and say that not that is it possible that not that many people trust themselves?
That's exactly in part where I'm going. Yes.
There you go.
So talk a little bit more about that.
Well, it seems like common sense suggests here is a commonly accepted way to behave or react in a situation. And intuitively, you you either know or you don't know, but let's say you know, like I like to live life as if I know, at least my character knows how to behave. So they know how to, but they don't try. They're like, oh, I know I should be nice right now, but that the common sense says this is how you deal with this. But I don't trust that. I don't trust myself. So I don't do that. Because unconscious competence means I know what to do. I don't even have to think about it. I just do it. If unless I don't trust myself.
Well, I'm totally following you. So we could go a couple different directions. One would be, what does trusting yourself mean? The other is, and I mean, I think it was Mark Twain that said this. Might have been Yogi Bear. Is that common sense is not all that common, and
I
what I
love our two references, Mark Twain and Yogi Berra. That's
yeah, I
perfect.
know, and it was probably somebody else. It was probably who knows who it could have been.
We'll get our crack team of Googler researchers on that.
Exactly. But the bottom line is like what I see with people is so much as it's like what people often do is do what's done a lot or what they might even call normal, where it doesn't, there's no common sense behind it. There's no common sense behind the process of of somebody looking at something or following something and that they go, oh well, everyone else does it, so that must be what I'm supposed to be doing. And um
Oh, so they okay, so hold that right there. So they don't know what to do, so they look around for social cues or cultural cues of what to do, as opposed to common sense in the other way is I know what the thing is to do and I do it. And in your case, this person is consciously incompetent. So they're at stage number 2. They're consciously incompetent. I don't know what to do. So I'm conscious of my incompetence. So I look around and take my cue of what to do from those around me or the societal norm. Correct, Professor?
right. And a lot, yes. And I'm going to follow that, then I'm going to bring in another piece. So another yes and is there's a lot of times, or there are a lot of times that I see where it's like people do what they think they're supposed to do and it makes no sense.
Mm.
That, and when sort of circling back around to the different levels of competence that you were describing, and maybe in a minute it would be worth just saying those 4 levels, just so I
Sure.
know that we've talked about this before, but to bring it in is the piece that I see missing is people having some level of instinctual knowing that they ignore, and some level of intuitive knowing that they ignore. And they come in and go, well, that's what everybody else is doing, so I'm going to do that. And it's like, it's common in the sense that maybe 50% or more of the people are doing a certain kind of a thing,
Mm.
which makes it common, but it doesn't make it meaningful, or it doesn't make it something where it really connects into um, what really needs to be done,
As
or
I'm
really
as
need to.
I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about the person, Bob, who the situation comes up and Bob doesn't know how to respond and looks around for cues on how to do that and then says, "Oh, that looks like the way to do it," and then does it and it fails. I'm curious, or doesn't trust, as you said, institutional knowledge or intuitive knowledge or those things in our DNA that know to stay away from a saber-toothed tiger, right? Those kinds of things. Uh, Harken back to the show we did on trial and error. So Bob tries that thing. He goes, "Whoa, that didn't work." Does he learn from that? One would hope.
One would hope.
One would hope. And so we start to get to conscious competence, right? So now I tried that thing because I didn't know what to do. So I pulled that tool, whatever that thing was. I tried, oh shit, she didn't like that at all. That would don't bark back. When she's barking, don't bark back, right? So you learn, hopefully you learn, and hopefully we're dealing with people who are listening to the show who are evolved enough to like take the coaching. The universe is coaching you, or
Mm,
the person that you don't know how to react. You don't have the common sense to react in it. Like, hey, the common sense would be to be chivalrous in a particular situation, right? Hey, you
mhm.
were wrong. Be chivalrous in that situation. And that's common sense, but you don't know what to do and you do the wrong thing. Hopefully you learn from that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Here, I think I'm not doing such a great job on trying to explain what I'm trying to get to. Let me
Okay.
try. As anybody who's listened to this show knows, I do a great deal of horses. A huge part of my life is centered around horses. And let me give you two examples. One of my horses is a little bit older, has some arthritis in his neck. He's an incredibly sweet horse. The people will walk up and like try and pet him on his neck or his face, and he sort of goes like
Mm,
this and sort of semi nips at him, and his tail swishes, and he at times even he'll like take his paw and paw it on his hoof and paw it on the ground, and people go, why doesn't he like me?
mm,
Or the other thing, and this is what I'm really getting to, is they keep trying to do the same thing that they did, getting some sort of cue that they're not actually listening to. They're not
mm,
using their
mm,
senses to
mm,
pick it up.
mm, 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 mm,
And you can look at it and go, oh, that doesn't look so good. But if I'm standing there, what happens in my gut is this isn't great right now.
mm. As
Something,
the observer, you're figuring, that, and you're
yeah,
trying to figure out, are they going to get the horse is giving them cues.
right. The horse is giving them something to that allows their senses to kick in, and they're not listening to their senses. They're not picking up those cues. So that's one example. And this other one just it happened. What day is today?
Saturday.
Saturday. Wednesday, I took one of my horses down to ride where I often ride. There's a beautiful park near us called Bear Creek Lake Park. And I take him down there in my trailer. I trailered him and got out, tacked him up, got on and rode. It was a real shorter, like 45-minute ride, easy ride. He's recovering from an injury. And I got back and was getting ready to put him back in the trailer. And another gentleman had pulled up with his horse. And he was probably my age. And his horse was like energetically was like way up and like looking around and watching and sort of nervous and scared instead of being settled. And he started getting on his horse.
Mm-mm.
And I went up to him and said, "I'm not so sure that's a good idea."
You don't know the guy. He doesn't know him.
I
You've
never
got
saw the guy,
you've got an
never saw the
incoming.
horse. I
Oh,
and
how did the story end?
well, it ended actually well.
Oh,
And he
good.
went, "I was thinking the same thing." As he pulled his foot back out of the stirrup, he was up on
Mm,
a mounting, and I was thinking the same thing. And
mm.
it was like, yeah, in my as we're talking here, common sense to me goes, okay, here's this horse that's really troubled right now. You could tell this horse was a very sweet horse. And that horse was troubled right there at that moment. And and you know, I'm in my 70s. I'm pretty sure he was too. You don't bounce as well as you bounced 50 years ago. And it was like when I said to him, "I'm not so sure that's such a good idea." And he pulled his foot out of that stirrup and went, "Oh, that's what I was thinking too."
Mm.
And then he looked at me and he goes, "I want my horse to be as calm as your horse is." Well, I've been down to that particular place probably 30 times, and I work diligently with my horses around stuff. And then he goes, "Well, I haven't ridden this horse for about a year." And I'm going, "Oh, so a horse that's not really been ridden, that hasn't really been worked with in a brand new place, and this horse was troubled." Again, really, really, you could tell there was a sweetness with this horse. This is not a dangerous horse, just a troubled horse. And he and I started talking, and there's a great big arena, and I said, "My suggestion is if you're willing to listen, you get to do whatever you want to do, is to take the saddle off, take the bridle off, let your horse go into the arena and run around and buck and kick and roll in the sand." And he went, "Oh, yeah, yeah, I think I'm going to do that." And then he, interestingly enough, he walked around and he tried to mount again. And I,
What?
yeah, and I went, think that might not be a good idea. And he goes, "Yeah, I know. I just thought I'd try." And I said, "When was the last time you rode?" He said, "Well, maybe a year and a half ago." And that was the only time I'd ridden since like 4 years ago when I went on to get another horse. And as soon as I put my foot in the stirrup, that horse, this was another horse, not the one he had there. And he said, as soon as I did, the horse started bucking and I couldn't get my foot out of the stirrup. And I ended up in the hospital for a week. And I went, "Oh, okay." And as we spoke,
Next, you're going to tell me his name is Bob.
no, his name was George. But it was like, and I'm going, what? There were so many cues
Right.
and so much sensory, and I'm really want to talk about the senses, because the senses, our sensory system picking up. One, there's visual, there's auditory, there's, touch, there's all of those. But there's this part inside of us that it's like, "Ooh, this is not a good situation right
Mm,
now,"
mm.
that we don't listen to. And thankfully, he and I was very kind to him. I said, "Boy, I'd hate for you to be in the hospital again. Think again
You would
about
have
taking."
been the guy to have to call 911.
Yeah, and maybe, give them CPR while they're coming.
Yeah.
And he finally said, "Yeah, I'm gonna take the saddle off and put my horse in the arena." And um, I stayed, and because I'd already loaded, I was getting ready to load my horse up and come home. And I stayed until I saw him taking the saddle off. And it was like, okay, you may or may not put him in the arena, but you're not going to get on him. And I even offered, I said, "Do you want my number, name and number, contact info? And if you want, I can help you with your horse down the road if you want." And he said, "Well, no, I think I'll be okay." And I don't know whether he ended up putting his horse in the arena or not, but it was like, as soon as he took the saddle off, though, I could see the horse started to settle. And it was like, what happened for him, and what happens for people in those situations, that it would be like, it, in my mind, common sense is the only. I mean, you look at this horse, and he's sort of jumping around, and his energy's up, and he's watching every place, and he's not standing still. And you could tell the rider was, you could tell he was nervous and scared. And it's like, what do we do to override those things, that kind of information that's coming in? Because, and one of the things he goes, "Yeah," he said, "I've ridden some pretty rough horses in my life." And it's like, okay, and you were probably 20.
And they might not have been rough. It might have been a similar situation to what you just described.
Very,
And
very,
he's an oblivious George.
yeah. And it's like, where is that part? And this does go back, Mark. I think this does go back to what you were talking about around trusting ourselves, because it was like, I had a couple of choices. One was to hurry up and get out of there and not watch him get killed. But the other one was to actually go say something,
Because you're Dewey Freeman.
right, and go, "I don't want you to get hurt."
Right, exactly.
And and I mean, I never, and he had a very fancy rig. I mean, I have a decent trailer and a decent truck, but this guy, was like 3 levels up. And it's like, and it was like, what's going on with this, that we're missing the cues that we need to get?
I think that first off, he should they be thanking the universe that you were there because you saved him from going to the hospital. Number one,
Very likely.
very likely. Number two, one of the things is, as soon as you added a couple of pieces of information, he was a high status guy, who was entitled, an entitled guy,
Ooh,
and
uh,
arrogant, right? Because those were the
possibly. I don't want to judge people, but
might have
yes,
been a
that
nice guy, but he's used to, he can buy his way out of situations. And hey,
really
you've
like.
got a horse and gonna throw a saddle on it. God damn it, that horse is gonna do what all of that.
Mhm.
I'm projecting, I'm endowing him with a lot of these negative traits. Uh, but I think there's two things. One is, and what I love about this show is we established early on some themes that we keep going back to, and this one is about being present. So you described a man who
Ooh,
was not being present. Here was a
right.
man who had already decided, I'm going. He was he had a plan. I am going to go and I'm going to ride my horse on this beautiful day. And then he had a plan, but he wasn't present to notice that it was not the horse's plan to be ridden at that moment. Right.
Yes.
Right. And that's
He had a different plan than the horse had.
well, exactly,
Sure.
exactly. And that's, I'm going to go back to improv. I've got a plan of how the scene is going to go. I have a plan of how the show is going to go. And then you say something or you're in a whatever. And if I don't react to that, we're going to be at cross purpose, which is what happened in that situation. So one is a lack of presence. The other thing that comes to mind is when you ignore a situation, if you ignore it consciously, doesn't that speak to some kind of arrogance?
Maybe, or it might speak to some kind of lack of common sense.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's our show.
And I think it also might speak to some unwillingness to read the cues around us.
Well, again, back to I know better than the situation that's being presented to me. Okay, yeah, I get it. Horses, yeah, fuck that. Fuck the horse. I'm getting on anyway. Which is that's how I got to the arrogance. I also want to, because we're live, I want to remind the people who are listening. We have a few people listening. If they have some questions, like they want to chime in, as you're listening to these, our recordings that come out, I'm sure guys have questions that they would like to ask. So feel free to post those in the chat and we'll take them. So if it's not arrogance, is it willful, not ignorance? I'm willfully ignoring those cues. Yes, here's the stimulus, but you know what? I've seen this before, and it's a false positive. While right, I'm taking these cues in. I'm so aware, but I believe they're incorrect. And I know better than the horse. And that once I get on, my superior horseman skills are going to allow me to calm the horse down. That could have been an outcome. But in your Sherlockian method, you found out it had been a year, it had been 4 years before that. Chances were he was unconsciously incompetent.
Well, very possibly. And in the end, I think he actually was picking up the cues that
Mm,
I was seeing. He was just overriding them because he wanted. It was the days here have been
yeah,
unbelievably
yeah.
beautiful here. Like clear cobalt blue skies, 63 degrees, sun.
Why you live there?
It's some of the most beautiful days of the last year. That it was down by Bear Creek, which is gorgeous. The trees were yellow and red, and it's one of the few places that have deciduous trees around. Uh, and other than just for people not in Colorado, most of the trees here are pine of some sort. And or aspen. There are very few oak, et cetera, et cetera. Cottonwoods. But what my gut is not that he was so arrogant or that he was even completely incompetent. What my gut is that he had a plan that he really wanted to stick to.
Mm, mm.
It, and and maybe it was his only day off, um, and it was just important, and he loves horses, and I mean that I would probably go there more than I would, go to any particularly negative place. Of I just really want this so bad,
Mm.
and this would be so wonderful, and it was. I mean, it was. It was like up in the mountains where I'm at. I had a sweatshirt and a down vest on. When I went down there, I could put a t-shirt on, and it was like literally 63 degrees and sunny. It's like my favorite, you know,
Mhm.
weather. And it was like, oh well, this is really what I want to do. And yeah, there's some things that I'm going to bump into, but and just trying to push through, which overrides the common sense part. Um, and well, maybe a question to people is, how many times is it that we really, really want something and we override the common sense part of it, even going into, for instance, we spend a day thinking about making love to our sweetie, and you know she comes home and you can tell
Not
you,
reading the cues. Been
yeah,
there.
and you can
Yeah.
tell it's like, oh, this
Mm.
it's just not there today. And then we say something and we end up in a huge fight and or argument. And it's like, you know, had I waited an hour or had I waited a
Mhm.
day,
Mhm.
things would have turned out very differently.
Mhm.
And what cues do we need to read in the common environment to able to actually use what I would say would be our common sense?
I think we're seeing a few themes converge here, and one is being present. It When you're present and your radar is lit, then you're taking in all that input. You're not judging it. You're not thinking about it. You're feeling it. You have that somatic sense of what's going on. That's the purest presence you could have. And in
Yes.
that situation, you're going to react appropriately because your body knows what to do, even if your brain doesn't. Right? I'm going to trust that. Right?
Mhm.
So if we're not present, so the first thing is just, and we also know that that is the one of the aspirational goals for all of us is to be present all the time. And we also know that's really hard. So, but to start there. I think the other part is a lesson I've learned at improv is to prepare, don't plan.
Ooh, talk about that a little more, please, because
So in improv,
that's exactly what happened.
yeah.
Your piece after I shared that story, your piece of coming in and going, "Oh, presence." Yes.
So it's prepare, don't plan. I'm prepared and I have some ideas, but I can't plan because you can't plan and be present at the same time because planning is future tense, right? But I'm prepared. I'm ready. I'm ready to receive. Quote the Eagles, right? I'm ready to receive. I'm ready to
Mm,
whatever the universe is going to bring me right now. Oh, it's going to bring me an opportunity to deal with my bride who I want to be intimate with, but she's not in the state. So I get it. This is another grandmaster said, this is an opportunity to train. Okay. So now I can, right. So I
I
can
love
work
it.
on me giving her the space to be able to relax and kind of get out of her head. And that's an
Mhm.
opportunity for me to train, knowing that in this relationship, it's about giving, it's about creating space, all these things we've been talking about. In the situation where I'm not being present, it's about me. If I'm planning, it's what I want to do, not what needs to be done or what is in front of me. So in one sense, it's very simple, but it's not easy.
Yes.
And with that, I'd like to put a button on that thread, because a question came in, and
Oh.
what I love about live is we can pivot, right? We're prepared,
Mhm, mhm.
and we can pivot. The
Didn't
question
plan.
is, I'm struggling with impending death of my parents and wanted to see if you would touch on important conversations with loved ones in the last quarter of their lives.
Ooh, that's a big shift.
I've uh I've
And
done that. I'm in that.
yes. Would you like to speak to that first?
I think that it's a tough conversation for you, not for them,
Keep
because
going.
they know, like they know. I know. We've talked about this, right? I'm, I've got more yesterdays than I have tomorrows. So I know that. So were my daughter to come to me and say, "Hey, Pops, I'd love to set up a time where we can have a regular story time and I want to bring my grandson, I want to bring your grandson with me. And I'd love to set up story time. And if you don't mind, I'd like to record it because I'd like him to have it for his kids."
Mm,
I would say, "Wow, daughter, that's pretty amazing. And yes, when can we start?" Right.
absolutely.
With Kimberly's grandma, who passed away earlier this year at 102,
Wow.
10 years ago. So at 92, but that was still 10 years ago, we started having regular conversations about asking her to tell stories. We just called it story time. Hey, we're going
Mhm.
to go to Moose and let's have story time and pay and be as present as you could be. And what I found was very helpful was bringing, I'd say, "Well, what was the address of that place in the Bronx?" And she knew the address where she lived when she was 12, like that. We know that. We are long, most of
Mhm.
even though we have maybe have some hard time remembering what we had for breakfast, we remember where we lived when we were 12. And I brought it up in Google Earth, and there you could see it. And
Oh, wow.
I turned around and showed it to her. I says, "Is this where you lived?" And she goes, "Here's what she said, Dewey. Wow, that tree's gotten big."
Mm.
She was there. She was right there. My, that tree's gotten big. And she transported back there and was able to tell us, what was it like? What did you go to school? Just like, you can start to ask those kind of questions. People love telling stories. That's why I feel like I'm in the best business in the world. And so I would suggest that as your parents go into act 3, that you and your loved ones turn it into story time. Make it fun. Make it a fun thing. And be very Sherlockian in asking for details. What did it smell like? What did it look like? Who else was there? What were they wearing? What were they doing? What did you say? What did you, if you want to go a little deeper, gosh, was there a struggle there? Oh yeah. And then you just see them raise their eyes. Oh yeah. And
Mhm.
well, what happened with what did you learn something? Oh yeah. Well, you know what? That's when I learned, how I always used to tell you to da da da. It was because that Billy hit me that time and when I was 14. And that's why I told you. So and our guest says curiosity is love. Absolutely. I'm a but if I did have a tattoo, it would say, "Be curious."
Yes. So would you repeat that was beautiful. Would you circle back around if you can remember 5 minutes ago or 7 minutes ago? Would you repeat the first sentence you said and it was about they're more open or able or willing to talk than we are. Do you remember that?
So there is the story that we tell ourselves that when we go to someone older than us, that their impending doom is some kind of unknown thing to them, and
Right.
we don't want to talk about that. It's
Exactly.
like, hey, guess what? They're more adult than you are, and everyone knows they're going to die. It's not something, facing our own mortality is something that some of us have had to deal with when we're very, very young and we cheated death. And we thank God every day that, we get to have another day. And so this is not a news bulletin. So what you're doing is saying, I want to capture as much of that life experience as I can, while through our lives, as with our parents, through our lives, there's that whole period I didn't want to listen to a fucking thing you said, Dad. And then and then I was gone and living my own life, and I talked to you on the holidays, Dad. I'm recounting my own experience.
Mhm.
And now that it looks like, you were getting to punch out, I want to hear all those stories. I
Yes.
need to hear all those stories, because that's part of your stories are part of me.
Hmm.
And I want to be able to pass those stories on, and taking the time and making it a fun thing is, in my experience, it was fun. Moo, that was Kimberly's grandmother, she loved that. She loved being able to, and she wasn't a natural storyteller. It wasn't her natural thing to do that. But you create a space for that to happen, and they know that. I think it was important to them, to her, to kind of get it all right and know that she was passing that story to us. This was not casual. There was some
Hmm.
stakes involved.
Right. Um, I love that. And I would also just like to share a personal piece before we end up wrapping up today. Do you remember when we were doing the initiation down in Austin, and that Saturday morning, you and I did a
We did a
live show?
live, yeah, we did.
And one of the things that happened was in that show, I don't remember exactly how we got there, but I was talking about that, at 72, and I'm in the last probably quarter of my life. I'm lucky I have 20 to 25 years. Maybe I'll make it to 102. And after we got off, and if I remember too, I was emotional.
It was.
But after I got off, a number of men came up and went, "Oh my God, you can't die," or uh, I mean, it was all purely out of love,
Yeah,
thousand
sure, sure,
percent.
sure.
And it was like, well, I know that that's going to happen, and I want to be able to talk about it. And in allowing myself to talk about it, it also allows, and then when people respond to that with some level of grief, which was part of what was happening. It was like people just saying, "Oh my God, I, I'm beginning to feel some grief around this." Is that is important to me and means a lot to me because I get to experience those men who love me and that I love them.
Mm,
I get to
mm,
experience
mm,
their
mm.
grief because I'm not going to be able to experience that at my
Right.
funeral. I'm not going to be able to. I mean, I don't know whether three or, you know, I don't know how many people are going to be at my services, but it's like, I'm not going to get to experience that. I'm not going to get to hear what people say. And the truth is I would like to hear what people say. And
Do you want a pre-funeral?
yeah, and actually some people are doing that. I don't know if I want to go quite that far, but it's like that's meaningful to me,
Yeah.
is people sharing that depth of love and caring where where I can do something with it now. Where
I
it
have had the opportunity to be the end of life chef for a couple of people.
Mhm.
And one of them, I just loved this guy. And he make his caregivers get him in all of his unplug all of his electronics, get him in the car when they came to pick up the food for him, so he and I
Mhm.
could talk face to face instead
Isn't
of
that
on Zoom.
incredible?
Yeah, and I said, "I wanna have you on my show." And, so our mutual friend who introduced us said, "He's got a couple days left." And the show was gonna be in a couple of weeks, and I said, "Well, let's do the show today." And we went out and did the show that day,
Mm.
and, um, and it showed that night, and his family all got there, and, they were eating my food, I heard afterwards, and I'm gonna get emotional now because as they're all watching the show, his dad, for the first time, told his son he was proud of him.
Wow, that's perfect.
And for him to hear that before his dad said it at his funeral a week later meant a lot. He passed away the next day.
No shit, wow. Talk about
So,
presence.
very much so. My friend, this has been great, and those of you who have, been on the and got to watch see how we do, this live, we're gonna do this on a probably once a month, and
Yeah,
hope you enjoyed that, and, and I loved, the getting a question there in the middle, to be able
yeah,
to,
that's
and
perfect.
and so, um, that's part of preparing, not planning. So we prepared for those. We didn't plan on what we were gonna get, and we were able to do it, which I loved. So, my friend, have a great week. Let's talk next week, and for those that joined us, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.